Be ready to pivot. Our plans will be disrupted. It is part of life, ladies and gentlemen. 3 key ingredients to having a pivot mindset. Number 1, we can only control how we react to situations. Instead of reacting to a situation, assess, weigh our options, and then respond by making a thoughtful decision. Number 2, don't tell yourself a bad story. We love to put ourselves down by making up stories about why something didn't go according to plan. So instead, tell yourself a good story and how the unexpected situation is now going to benefit you. It'll change the perspective. Number 3, prepare plan B ahead of time. It can never hurt to be prepared for the pivot. So think about what that plan B might look like so you can adjust without missing a beat. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to It's the Bearded Man Podcast with your favorite, the world's favorite bearded man, Babe. Episode 69, be ready to pivot. The plan will be disrupted. Are you the type of person that gets frustrated, worked up when things don't go according to plan? Do you find yourself getting angry, stressed, or anxious when you have to make a change? Our plans will be disrupted at some point in time. It's part of life, and we have 2 options when this happens. Number 1, we allow it to get to us, which is not a good option, but it happens to the majority of us. Been there, done that too many times. Or number 2, we adjust on the fly and we keep it moving. Big fan of this option. One that I've been leading on a lot more over the last couple of years. Takes time, but you can get to that option number 2 as well. Today, I want to talk about how we can start to train our minds to always be ready to pivot. So then when things do arise and our plans don't go according to plan, we are ready to roll, baby. A few weeks ago, I had a podcast locked in with someone, and about 2 hours before recording the podcast, I was told that this person was no longer available and we would have to push the podcast to a later date. Now, old me would have been stressed. I would have been annoyed. I would have gotten all worked up because I have to reschedule it. It would be as if I thought the world revolved around the bearded man. Now, if you listen to this podcast, you get a lot of energy out of me. It might sound like I think I'm some hot shit, or I do think the world revolves around me. That's not absolutely true at all. I know that's not the case. And there's times when the old me would allow that to happen, where I would think, woe's me. The world's not revolving around me. Boo-hoo. Blah, 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 blah. And the thing is, I would think that I would take it personal if, for instance, somebody pivoted, right, in this moment in time when the guest can no longer be on the podcast on this set schedule. And I would think that, oh, this person doesn't value my time. You know, they're rescheduling it 2 hours in advance. Like, come on, man. Like, why are you doing this last minute? Blah, 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 blah. My head would be like a freight train of thoughts going on and on about the why of why this person pushed back the podcast. I wouldn't have been even given a reason as to why, and I would be making up all these excuses in my mind that in reality weren't true and was really just digging me deeper down into the ground because I was making myself feel like shit. I was coming up with excuses of why I wasn't valuable, maybe. And ultimately, it wouldn't work for me. It wouldn't be good for me to be brewing up these thoughts in my head. But the new me, the 2021 version of the bearded man, is a much better version, okay? This version of me now respects people's time and understands that things do come up. Things do come up. There's been times in my life when something unexpectedly happens and I have to make a change. So I understand now that when this person bails 2 hours out, I don't take it personal. I just understand, you know what? Something came up, no big deal. And I recognize that there is a lot of uncontrollables in this world that I can't control. I can't control if the sky is blue tomorrow, if the sky is cloudy, if it's rain, if the sun is out or if it's not. Granted, living in Los Angeles, very predictable weather. 75 degrees sunny today. Thank you very much. I'll take it. But for the most part, there's a lot of uncontrollables that I can't control. The only thing that I can control is how I react to situations. So in this moment in time, when the person cancels, the only thing I can control in that moment is how I react to that situation. So I then ask myself immediately, how can I use this extra time to benefit me? Instead, I went and read a book, went for a nice run. I made the use of the time. It wasn't wasted. Old me would have sat around, probably ticked off, annoyed, and wasted that time to then realize hours later, wow, I could have utilized that time to do X, Y, and Z. And like I said, it has taken time. And if anybody on here that's listening follows me on Instagram, you might have seen me post this on my story. And that's why I made a quick note of like, I got to talk about this on a podcast because my ability to pivot and the way I move now is so much different than a couple years ago. It's taken time. It's taken a mindset shift. It's taking probably other multiple times where things have had to change last minute. And so I've learned to just adjust on the fly because inevitably plans are never going to be perfect. Things are going to change. I can't control a lot of situations, but I can only control how I react to them. So ultimately, although I wasn't exactly planning on going for a run or reading a book that night, I was still able to pivot on the fly and make use of the time. And that's why I want to dive into it today and hope I can provide you, beautiful guys and gals, some value. So the pivot mindset, 3 key ingredients to having this pivot mindset. Number 1, we can only control how we react to situations. I know I just went a little tangent a second ago, but this is number 1. This is super important. There are so many uncontrollables in this world. We don't get picked for the job. The girl, the guy doesn't respond to our DM. Someone rear ends us while we're sitting at a red light. Answer any possible situation that you can think of, okay? How does us getting angry, frustrated, heated in any of these situations help us? Let's think about that for a quick hot second. How does getting worked up in any of these moments in time, these situations, how does it help us? You hear that? That's called crickets. Nothing. Nobody's saying a thing because it doesn't help us. Not one bit. We need to train ourselves and our minds to not let our emotions get the best of us. And this takes time and practice, but it can be done. You're learning and you're listening from a guy who has learned it, okay? I used to get extremely worked up over a lot of dumb shit. And I'm proud to say I have left that old chapter of me and I'm on to a new one. A much more zen man, zen bearded man. So by not allowing these emotions to get to us, it allows us to assess the situation, we weigh our options, and then we make a decision on how we want to respond to the situation, okay? The old me would have reacted, okay? What does that mean? It's us letting our emotions get the best of us. We make an instant decision, snap of a fingers, and we worry about the consequences later. I get all mad. The podcast guest moved the date a couple weeks later. Blah, blah, blah. I'm all mad. Okay. That's me reacting immediately, listening to my emotions and staying attached to it. The other option is we respond to the situation. This is the better way to approach it. We respond. And what do I mean by that? We give ourselves space from the situation. We stop taking it so personal. We think through and we weigh what our options are, and then we move forward. We are the leader of a unit. And I think the only reason that I've been able to assess situations and not get reactive about the podcast guest moving the podcast is because I've been able to step away from the situation and go, okay, this person's moving the podcast to later, no problem. What does that mean? Now I have an extra 2.5 hours to myself tonight. Okay, that's the situation. What do I want to do at that time? I weigh my options. I'm going to read. I'm going to go for a run. Great. Boom. Execute. Let's go. And that's how I assess the situation. So the next time something doesn't go according to plan, accept it for what it is. Respond to that situation. Don't let your emotions get the best of you. Assess that situation. Weigh your options. And then attack. Number 2, don't tell yourself a bad story. Extremely, extremely important. Like I said earlier, me having to reschedule that podcast, I could have made up a million different stories in my mind about why it had to be moved. This person doesn't think I'm good enough podcaster, so they're moving it. Or, wow, he or she must not value my time, ... OMG. Or maybe I think to myself, I don't have enough IG followers, so they just must not take me serious enough. Those are all false. Those are 3 thoughts in my brain that I've made up that I'm telling myself a bad story, okay? All these thoughts and excuses are made up by me. This person didn't communicate it to me. I just am a little crazy, and I'm sitting here thinking through all these pessimistic and negative thoughts in my mind for no other reason than to try to rationalize and understand the situation that I'm in, which ultimately was not in my control. And all this does is I dig deep and deep into a hole because I'm telling myself a bad story. And it's hard to pull yourself back up because you just made yourself feel like shit. Okay? So anytime these thoughts pop up in your brain, these bad thoughts, you telling yourself a bad story about a situation, whatever it might be, let them pass through. Okay? The Bearded Man did a little bit of research before jumping on this podcast. Our minds process a lot of thoughts in a day. According to newshub.co, which came out with a study in 2020, we have on average 6,000 thoughts per day. Let me say that one more time. We have on average 6,000 thoughts per day, okay? If that's the case, it's only a matter of seconds, maybe minutes, before that bad thought processes through your head. So be patient and don't hold on to it and don't get all worked up over it because at some point it's going to leave your brain and you're going to be on to the next thought. And hopefully that next thought is sunshine, flowers, butterflies, and me, okay? Matter of fact, let's tell ourselves a good story. For example, the podcast had to be moved because maybe the guest had a Zoom dinner with his parents or her parents. Whether the podcast guest is a guy or girl, it doesn't matter. Maybe this person had a last-minute Zoom dinner with their parents. I would be totally cool with that. I would say, please, tell them I said hello. Or maybe they have COVID and they couldn't disclose it to me because nobody really wants to share that they have COVID. Maybe the person got COVID and I didn't know and they just had to reshift it. Or maybe they weren't in a good enough headspace and they needed some personal time for themselves so that they could come into the podcast with a clear headspace and give me their best podcasting version of themselves. Ultimately, they were taking care of themselves before they worried about me, which I respect. I would do the same thing if I was in their shoes. But see how that changes the perspective of the situation? Instead of me telling myself a bad story about, oh, they must not be doing the podcast because it's me. I'm not a big podcaster. I don't have a bunch of followers on Instagram. Insert all my other lame excuses that are popping in my head. What if I told myself a good story, right? What if I thought about positive reasons of why they probably had to reschedule it? It changes the perspective. So anytime you find yourself in that situation where you have to pivot, tell yourself a good story of why this is happening. Or another great example, if I in the past when somebody declines, to do a podcast with me, I go, great. That means that the next time that I do get a chance to actually do this with them in 6 months or a year, I'm going to be a better podcaster. They're going to be in a better position in their life. It's a win-win. Tell yourself a good story. It's extremely important. Quick water break. Everyone get your waters out right now. Let's go. Chug on 3. 1, 2, 3. Gotta love it. Gotta love it. Just love water. So good. Number 3, prepare plan B ahead of time. Sounds so obvious, but yet we never do it. It can never hurt to have a backup plan ready to go ahead of time. That way, when things shift, we are like the ocean. We're going with the flow. We make those adjustments without missing a beat. So in my example, I was about to draw up plan B. I was able to draw plan B, within minutes because I've accepted that things don't always go according to plan ahead of time. I've learned this in the past. I know that things aren't always going to go the way that I want them to go. And this kind of goes similarly to the first section. We can only control how we react to situations, but I think this deserves its own bullet, its own call out. So like I was saying, there was no time and energy of me wasted thinking about that plan B, thinking about, wow, I'm no longer doing this podcast. This is such a waste of my time, blah, 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 blah. Immediately, snap of fingers, like a light switch. Within seconds, I was not worried about that rescheduling aspect. I was solely about what am I going to do in the next 2 hours when I have the time and I have time to kill now because I'm not doing the podcast. And I was ready for it. I was ready to pivot. Within seconds, I knew what I was going to do now that this wasn't happening. And let me just say this. I might sound crazy to those listening right now. Like, why are you getting so worked up over a podcast? At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, I really, really, really value my time. I really respect other people's time. And I hope you value your time just as much, because time continues to flow. We cannot control time. It comes and it goes. Money can't buy you more of it. So to me, having really big goals and ambition, I know I have to make every single second and minute and hour count. Now, in a day, it might not seem like much, but you multiply that across a week, across a month, 6 months, a year, and it stacks up. So I'm very, very cautious of where I spend my time and energy. And I think all of us should be. How do we develop that plan B? Great question. I hope you're asking yourself that. By asking ourselves, if this doesn't work out, what's my next move? So it does not matter if you're not a podcaster. Anyone out there, it's always thinking ahead, right? It's like being a chess player. I know Queen's Gambit, huge Netflix series that got everyone playing chess again and talking about it. I'm guilty of it. But if you watch that series, a game of chess is about thinking moves ahead. And that's something that we need to do within our own lives. We need to be constantly thinking 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 moves ahead, so that we know where we're going. And also, if we have to pivot, we know exactly still what that pivot might look like. So constantly thinking a few steps ahead, even though we don't know how the next move is going to work, is really important. Constantly assessing, constantly moving. We are chess players in our own lives. Prepare plan B ahead of time. So to recap, be ready to pivot. Our plans will be disrupted. It is part of life, ladies and gentlemen. 3 key ingredients to having a pivot mindset. Number 1, we can only control how we react to situations. Instead of reacting to a situation, assess, weigh our options, and then respond by making a thoughtful decision. Number 2, don't tell yourself a bad story. We love to put ourselves down by making up stories about why something didn't go according to plan. So instead, tell yourself a good story and how the unexpected situation is now going to benefit you. It'll change the perspective. Number 3, prepare plan B ahead of time. It can never hurt to be prepared for the pivot. So think about what that plan B might look like so you can adjust without missing a beat. My challenge for you guys and gals, next time you have to make a pivot in your life, don't let your emotions get to you. Respond instead of reacting. It is the only option you have got. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 69, be ready to pivot. The plan will be disrupted just like that. We did it. If you guys and gals enjoyed this podcast, please screenshot this episode, post it to your IG story, tag me at Bob-A, B-O, 3 B's, 4 A's, and a Y. Share it out on your IG story and let the world know why you're listening to this podcast. It greatly, greatly helps us grow this podcast organically, and I greatly appreciate it. If there's any topics you would like me to cover next, feel free to slide through my DM. I got plenty of topics to talk on, but if you got something you want me to specifically hit, I'm more than game. So thank you guys and gals for tuning in. It's the Bearded Man Podcast. See ya!